Sevastopol in December 1854. Leo Tolstoy. The flush of morning has but just begun to tinge the sky above Sapun Mountain. The dark blue surface of the sea has already cast aside the shades of night and awaits the first ray to begin a play of merry gleams. Cold and mist are wafted from the bay. There is no snow, all is black, but the morning frost pinches the face and crackles underfoot, and the far-off, unceasing roar of the sea, broken now and then by the thunder of the firing in Sevastopol, alone disturbs the calm of the morning. It is dark on board the ships. It has just struck 8 bells. Toward the north, the activity of the day begins gradually to replace the nocturnal quiet. Here, the relief guard has passed, clanking their arms. There, the doctor is already hastening to the hospital. Further on, the soldier has crept out of his earth hut and is washing his sunburnt face in ice-encrusted water, and turning towards the crimsoning east, crosses himself quickly as he prays to God. Here, a tall and heavy camel wagon has dragged creaking to the cemetery to bury the bloody dead, with whom it is laden nearly to the top. You go to the wharf. A peculiar odor of coal, manure, dampness, and of beef strikes you. Thousands of objects of all sorts, wood, meat, gabions, flour, iron, and so forth, lie in heaps about the wharf. Soldiers of various regiments, with knapsacks and muskets, without knapsacks and without muskets, throng thither, smoke, quarrel, drag weights aboard the steamer which lies smoking beside the quay. Unattached two-oared boats filled with all sorts of people, soldiers, sailors, merchants, women, land at and leave the wharf. "To the Grafsky, Your Excellency? Be so good." 2 or 3 retired sailors rise in their boats and offer you their services. You select the one who is nearest to you. You step over the half-decomposed carcass of a brown horse, which lies there in the mud beside the boat, and reach the stern. You quit the shore. All about you is the sea, already glittering in the morning sun. In front of you is an aged sailor in a camel's hair coat and a young, white-headed boy who work zealously and in silence at the oars. You gaze at the motley vastness of the vessels, scattered far and near over the bay, and at the small black dots of boats moving about on the shining azure expanse, and at the bright and beautiful buildings of the city, tinted with the rosy rays of the morning sun, which are visible in one direction, and at the foaming white line of the quay, and the sunken ships from which black tips of masts rise sadly here and there, and at the distant fleet of the enemy, faintly visible as they rock on the crystal horizon of the sea, and at the streaks of foam on which leap salt bubbles beaten up by the oars. You listen to the monotonous sound of voices which fly. To you, over the water, and the grand sounds of firing, which, as it seems to you, is increasing in Sevastopol. It cannot be that, at the thought that you too are in Sevastopol, a certain feeling of manliness, of pride, has not penetrated your soul, and that the blood has not begun to flow more swiftly through your veins. "Your Excellency, you are steering straight into the Kistantin," says your old sailor to you as he turns round to make sure of the direction which you are imparting to the boat, with the rudder to the right. "And all the cannon are still on it," remarks the white-headed boy, casting a glance over the ship as we pass. "Of course, it's new. Kornilov lived on board of it," said the old man, also glancing at the ship. "See where it has burst," says the boy, after a long silence, looking at a white cloud of spreading smoke which has suddenly appeared high over the South Bay, accompanied by the sharp report of an exploding bomb. "He is firing today with his new battery," adds the old man, calmly spitting on his hands. "Now give way, Mishka. We'll overtake the barge." And your boat moves forward more swiftly over the broad swells of the bay, and you actually do overtake the heavy barge, upon which some bags are piled, and which is rowed by awkward soldiers, and it touches the Grafsky wharf amid a multitude of boats of every sort which are landing. Throngs of grey soldiers, black sailors, and women of various colours move noisily along the shore. The women are selling rolls, Russian peasants with samovars are crying hot spiton, and here upon the first steps are strewn rusted cannonballs, bombs, grape shot, and cast iron cannon of various calibers. A little further on is a large square, upon which lie huge beams, gun carriages, sleeping soldiers. There stand horses, wagons, green guns, ammunition chests, and stacks of arms. Soldiers, sailors, officers, women, children, and merchants are moving about. Carts are arriving with hay, bags, and casks. Here and there, Cossacks make their way through, or officers on horseback, or a general in a drosky. To the right, the street is hemmed in by a barricade, in whose embrasures stand some small cannon, and beside these sits a sailor smoking his pipe. On the left, a handsome house with Roman ciphers on the pediment, beneath which stand soldiers and blood-stained litters. Everywhere you behold the unpleasant signs of a war encampment. Your first impression is inevitably of the most disagreeable sort, the strange mixture of camp and town life, of a beautiful city and a dirty bivouac, is not only not beautiful, but seems repulsive disorder. It even seems to you that everyone is thoroughly frightened, and is fussing about without knowing what he is doing. But look more closely at the faces of these people who are moving about you, and you will gain an entirely different idea. Look at this little soldier from the provinces, for example, who is leading a troika of brown horses to water, and is purring something to himself so composedly that he evidently will not go astray in this motley crowd, which does not exist for him. But he is fulfilling his duty, whatever that may be, watering the horses or carrying arms, with just as much composure, self-confidence, and equanimity as though it were taking place in Tula or Saransk. You will read the same expression on the face of this officer who passes by in immaculate white gloves, and in the face of the sailor who is smoking as he sits on the barricade, and in the faces of the working soldiers, waiting with their litters on the steps of the former club, and in the face of yonder girl who, fearing to wet her pink gown, skips across the street on the little stones. Yes, disenchantment certainly awaits you if you are entering Sevastopol for the first time. In vain will you seek, on even a single countenance, for traces of anxiety, discomposure, or even of enthusiasm, readiness for death, decision. There is nothing of the sort. You will see the tradespeople quietly engaged in the duties of their callings, so that, possibly, you may reproach yourself for superfluous raptures. You may entertain some doubt as to the justice of the ideas regarding the heroism of the defenders of Sevastopol, which you have formed from stories, descriptions, and the sights and sounds on the northern side. But, before you doubt, go upon the bastions, observe the defenders of Sevastopol on the very scene of the defense, or better still, go straight across into that house, which was formerly the Sevastopol Assembly House, and upon whose roof stand soldiers with litters. There you will behold the defenders of Sevastopol. There you will behold frightful and sad, great and laughable, but wonderful sights which elevate the soul. You enter the great hall of assembly. You have but just opened the door when the sight and smell of 40 or 50 seriously wounded men, and of those who have undergone amputation, some in hammocks, the majority upon the floor, suddenly strike you. Trust not to the feeling which detains you upon the threshold of the hall. Be not ashamed of having come to look at the sufferers. Be not ashamed to approach and address them. The unfortunates like to see a sympathizing human face. They like to tell of their sufferings and to hear words of love and interest. You walk along between the beds and seek a face less stern and suffering, which you decide to approach with the object of conversing. "Where are you wounded?" you inquire, timidly and with indecision, of an old, gaunt soldier, who, seated in his hammock, is watching you with a good-natured glance, and seems to invite you to approach him. I say, you ask timidly, because these sufferings inspire you, over and above the feeling of profound sympathy, with a fear of offending and with a lofty reverence for the man who has undergone them. "In the leg," replies the soldier. But at the same time, you perceive by the folds of the coverlet that he has lost his leg above the knee. God be thanked now, he adds. I shall get my discharge. Were you wounded long ago? It was 6 weeks ago, Your Excellency. Does it still pain you? No, there's no pain now. Only there's a sort of gnawing in my calf when the weather is bad, but that's nothing. How did you come to be wounded? On the fifth bastion, during the first bombardment. I had just trained a cannon and was on the point of going away, so to another embrasure when it struck me in the leg, just as if I had stepped into a hole and had no leg. Was it not painful at the first moment? Not at all, only as though something boiling hot had struck my leg. Well, and then? And then? Nothing. Only the skin began to draw as though it had been rubbed hard. The first thing of all, Your Excellency, is not to think at all. If you don't think about a thing, it amounts to nothing. Men suffer from thinking more than from anything else. At that moment, a woman in a grey striped dress and a black kerchief bound about her head approaches you. She joins in your conversation with the sailor and begins to tell about him, about his sufferings, his desperate condition for the space of 4 weeks, and how, when he was wounded, he made the litter halt that he might see the volley from our battery, how the Grand Duke spoke to him and gave him 25 roubles, and how he said to him that he wanted to go back to the bastion to direct the younger men, even if he could not work himself. As she says all this in a breath, the woman glances now at you, now at the sailor, who has turned away as though he did not hear her, and plucks some lint from his pillow, and her eyes sparkle with peculiar enthusiasm. This is my housewife, Your Excellency, the sailor says to you, with an expression which seems to say, you must excuse her. Everyone knows it's a woman's way. She's talking nonsense. You begin to understand the defenders of Sevastopol. For some reason, you feel ashamed of yourself in the presence of this man. You would like to say a very great deal to him in order to express to him your sympathy and admiration, but you find no words, or you are dissatisfied with those which come into your head, and you do reverence. In silence, before this taciturn, unconscious grandeur and firmness of soul, this modesty in the face of his own merits. Well, God grant you a speedy recovery, you say to him, and you halt before another invalid who is lying on the floor and appears to be awaiting death in intolerable agony. He is a blond man with pale, swollen face. He is lying on his back, with his left arm thrown out, in a position which is expressive of cruel suffering. His parched, open mouth with difficulty emits his stertorous breathing. His blue, leaden eyes are rolled up, and from beneath the wadded coverlet the remains of his right arm, enveloped in bandages, protrude. The oppressive odour of a corpse strikes you forcibly, and the consuming internal fire which has penetrated every limb of the sufferer seems to penetrate you also. Is he unconscious? You inquire of the woman, who comes up to you and gazes at you tenderly as at a relative. No, he can still hear, but he's very bad, she adds in a whisper. I gave him some tea today. What if he is a stranger? One must still have pity, and he hardly tasted it. How do you feel? You ask him. The wounded man turns his eyeballs at the sound of your voice, but he neither sees nor understands you. There's a gnawing at my heart. A little further on, you see an old soldier changing his linen. His face and body are of a sort of cinnamon-brown colour and gaunt as a skeleton. He has no arm at all. It has been cut off at the shoulder. He is sitting with a wide-awake air. He puts himself to rights. But you see, by his dull, corpse-like gaze, his frightful gauntness, and the wrinkles on his face, that he is a being who has suffered for the best part of his life. On the other side, you behold in a cot the pale, suffering, and delicate face of a woman, upon whose cheek plays a feverish flush. That's our little sailor lass who was struck in the leg by a bomb on the 5th, your guide tells you. She was carrying her husband's dinner to him in the bastion. Has it been amputated? They cut it off above the knee. Now, if your nerves are strong, pass through the door on the left. In yonder room, they are applying bandages and performing operations. There, you will see doctors with their arms blood-stained above the elbow and with pale, stern faces busied about a cot, upon which, with eyes widely opened and uttering, as in delirium, incoherent, sometimes simple and touching words, lies a wounded man under the influence of chloroform. The doctors are busy with the repulsive but beneficent work of amputation. You see the sharp, curved knife enter the healthy white body. You see the wounded man suddenly regain consciousness with a piercing cry and curses. You see the army surgeon fling the amputated arm into a corner. You see another wounded man, lying in a litter in the same apartment, shrink convulsively and groan as he gazes at the operation upon his comrade, not so much from physical pain as from the moral torture of anticipation. You behold the frightful, soul-stirring scenes. You behold war, not from its conventional, beautiful, and brilliant side, with music and drumbeat, with fluttering flags and galloping generals, but you behold war in its real phase, in blood, in suffering, in death. On emerging from this house of pain, you will infallibly experience a sensation of pleasure. You will inhale the fresh air more fully. You will feel satisfaction in the consciousness of your health. But at the same time, you will draw from the sight of these sufferings a consciousness of your nothingness, and you will go calmly and without any indecision to the bastion. What do the death and sufferings of such an insignificant worm as I signify in comparison with so many deaths and such great sufferings? But the sight of the clear sky, the brilliant sun, the fine city, the open church, and the soldiers moving about in various directions soon restores your mind to its normal condition of frivolity, petty cares, and absorption in the present alone. Perhaps you meet the funeral procession of some officer coming from the church, with rose-coloured coffin and music and fluttering banners. Perhaps the sounds of firing reach your ear from the bastion, but this does not lead you back to your former thoughts. The funeral seems to you a very fine military spectacle, and you do not connect with this spectacle, or with the sounds, any clear idea of suffering and death, as you did at the point where the bandaging was going on. Passing the barricade and the church, you come to the most lively part of the city. On both sides hang the signs of shops and inns, merchants, women in bonnets and kerchiefs, dandified officers. Everything speaks to you of the firmness of spirit, of the independence and the security of the inhabitants. Enter the inn on the right if you wish to hear the conversations of sailors and officers. Stories of the preceding night are sure to be in progress there, and of Fenka, and the affair of the 24th, and of the dearness and badness of cutlets, and of such and such a comrade who has been killed. "Devil take it! How bad things are with us today!" ejaculates the bass voice of a beardless naval officer with white brows and lashes in a green knitted sash. "Where?" asks another. "In the fourth bastion," replies the young officer, and you are certain to look at the white-lashed officer with great attention, and even with some respect at the words, "in the fourth bastion." His excessive ease of manner, the way he flourishes his hands, his loud laugh, and his voice, which seems to you insolent, reveal to you that peculiar, boastful frame of mind which some very young men acquire after danger. Nevertheless, you think he's about to tell you how bad the condition of things on the fourth bastion is because of the bombs and balls. Nothing of the sort. Things are bad because it is muddy. "It's impossible to pass through the battery," says he, pointing at his boots, which are covered with mud above the calf. "And my best gun captain was killed today. He was struck plump in the forehead," says another. "Who's that? Mityukin?" "No. What now? Are they going to give me any veal? The villains," he adds to the servant of the inn. "Not Mityukin, but Abrosimov. Such a fine young fellow. He was in the 6th Sally." At another corner of the table, over a dish of cutlets with peas and a bottle of sour Crimean wine called Bordeaux, sit 2 infantry officers. One with a red collar, who is young and has 2 stars on his coat, is telling the other, with a black collar and no stars, about the affair at Alma. The former has already drunk a good deal, and it is evident from the breaks in his narrative, from his undecided glance expressive of doubt as to whether he is believed, and chiefly from the altogether too prominent part which he has played in it all, and from the excessive horror of it all, that he is strongly disinclined to bear strict witness to the truth. But these tales, which you will hear for a long time to come in every corner of Russia, are nothing to you. You prefer to go to the bastions, especially to the fourth, of which you have heard so many and such diverse things. When anyone says that he has been in the fourth bastion, he says it with a peculiar air of pride and satisfaction. When anyone says, "I am going to the fourth bastion," either a little agitation or a very great indifference is infallibly perceptible in him. When anyone wants to jest about another, he says, "You must be stationed in the fourth bastion." When you meet litters and inquire whence they come, the answer is generally, "From the fourth bastion." On the whole, two totally different opinions exist with regard to this terrible bastion. One is held by those who have never been in it, and who are convinced that the fourth bastion is a regular grave for everyone who enters it, and the other by those who live in it, like the white-lashed midshipmen, and who, when they mention the fourth bastion, will tell you whether it is dry or muddy there, whether it is warm or cold in the mud hut, and so forth. During the half-hour which you have passed in the inn, the weather has changed. A fog which before spread over the sea has collected into damp, heavy grey clouds and has veiled the sun. A kind of melancholy frozen mist sprinkles from above and wets the roofs, the sidewalks, and the soldiers' overcoats. Passing by yet another barricade, you emerge from the door at the right and ascend the principal street. Behind this barricade, the houses are unoccupied on both sides of. The street, there are no signs, the doors are covered with boards, the windows are broken in. Here the corners are broken away, there the roofs are pierced. The buildings seem to be old, to have undergone every sort of vicissitude and deprivation characteristic of veterans, and appear to gaze proudly and somewhat scornfully upon you. You stumble over the cannonballs which strew the way, and into holes filled with water which have been excavated in the stony ground by the bombs. In the street you meet and overtake bodies of soldiers, sharpshooters, officers. Now and then you encounter a woman or a child, but it is no longer a woman in a bonnet, but a sailor's daughter in an old fur cloak and soldier's boots. As you proceed along the street and descend a small declivity, you observe that there are no longer any houses about you, but only some strange heaps of ruined stones, boards, clay, and beams. Ahead of you, upon a steep hill, you perceive a black, muddy expanse, intersected by canals, and this that is in front is the fourth bastion. Here you meet still fewer people, no women are visible. The soldiers walk briskly. You come across drops of blood on the road, and you will certainly encounter there 4 soldiers with a stretcher, and upon the stretcher a pale yellowish face and a blood-stained overcoat. If you inquire, "Where is he wounded?" the bearers will say angrily, without turning towards you. "In the leg or the arm," if he is slightly wounded, or they will preserve a gloomy silence if no head is visible on the stretcher and he is already dead or badly hurt. The shriek of a cannonball or a bomb close by surprises you unpleasantly as you ascend the hill. You understand all at once, and quite differently from what you have before, the significance of those sounds of shots which you heard in the city. A quietly cheerful memory flashes suddenly before your fancy. Your own personality begins to occupy you more than your observations. Your attention to all that surrounds you diminishes, and a certain disagreeable feeling of uncertainty suddenly overmasters you. In spite of this decidedly base voice, which suddenly speaks within you at the sight of danger, you force it to be silent, especially when you glance at a soldier who runs laughing past you at a trot, waving his hands and slipping down the hill in the mud, and you involuntarily expand your chest, throw up your head a little higher, and climb the slippery, clayey hill. As soon as you have reached the top, rifle balls begin to whiz to the right and left of you, And possibly you begin to reflect whether you will not go into the trench which runs parallel with the road. But this trench is full of such yellow, liquid, foul-smelling mud, more than knee-deep, that you will infallibly choose the path on the hill, the more so as you see that everyone uses the path. After traversing a couple of 100 paces, you emerge upon a muddy expanse, all ploughed up and surrounded on all sides by gabions, earthworks, platforms, earth huts, upon which great cast-iron guns stand, and cannonballs lie in symmetrical heaps. All these seem to be heaped up without any aim, connection, or order. Here in the battery sit a knot of sailors. There, in the middle of the square, half buried in mud, lies a broken cannon. Further on, a foot. Soldier, with his gun, is marching through the battery and dragging his feet with difficulty through the sticky soil. But everywhere, on all sides, in every spot, you see broken dishes, unexploded bombs, cannonballs, signs of encampment, all sunk in the liquid, viscous mud. You seem to hear not far from you the thud of a cannonball. On all sides, you seem to hear the varied sounds of balls, humming like bees, whistling sharply, or in a whine like a cord. You hear the frightful roar of the fusillade, which seems to shake you all through with some horrible fright. So this is it, the fourth bastion. This is it, that terrible, really frightful place, you think to yourself, and you experience a little sensation of pride and a very large sensation of suppressed terror. But you are mistaken. This is not the fourth bastion. It is the Yazanovsky redoubt, a place which is comparatively safe and not at all dreadful. In order to reach the fourth bastion, you turn to the right, through this narrow trench through which the foot soldier has gone. In this trench you will perhaps meet stretchers again, sailors and soldiers with shovels. You will see the superintendent of the mines, mud huts, into which only 2 men can crawl by, bending down. And there you will see sharpshooters of the Black Sea battalions, who are changing their shoes, eating, smoking their pipes, and living. And you will still see everywhere that same stinking mud, traces of a camp, and cast-off iron debris in every possible form. Proceeding yet 300 paces, you will emerge again upon a battery, on an open space, all cut up into holes and surrounded by gabions, covered with earth, cannon, and earthworks. Here you will perhaps see 5 sailors playing cards under the shelter of the breastworks, and a naval officer who, perceiving that you are a newcomer and curious, will with pleasure show his household arrangements and everything which may be of interest to you. This officer rolls himself a cigarette of yellow paper with so much composure as he sits on a gun, walks so calmly from one embrasure to another, converses with you so quietly, without the slightest affectation, that, in spite of the bullets which hum above you even more thickly than before, you become cool yourself, question attentively, and listen to the officer's replies. This officer will tell you, but only if you ask him, about the bombardment on the 5th. He will tell you how only 1 gun in his battery could be used, and out of all the gunners who served it, only 8 remained, and how, nevertheless, on the next morning, the 6th, he fired all the guns. He will tell you how a bomb fell upon a sailor's earth hut on the 5th and laid low 11 men. He will point out to you, from the embrasures, the enemy's batteries and entrenchments, which are not more than 30 or 40 fathoms distant from this point. I fear, however, that under the influence of the whizzing bullets, you may thrust yourself out of the embrasure in order to view the enemy. You will see nothing, and, if you do see anything, you will be very much surprised that that white stone wall, which is so near you, and from which white smoke rises in puffs, that white wall is the enemy. He, as the soldiers and sailors say. It is even quite possible that the naval officer will want to discharge a shot or 2 in your presence, out of vanity or simply for his own pleasure. Send the captain and his crew to the cannon, and 14 sailors step up briskly and merrily to the gun and load it, one thrusting his pipe into his pocket, another one chewing a biscuit, still another clattering his heels on the platform. Observe the faces, the bearing, the movements of these men. In every wrinkle of that sunburned face, with its high cheekbones, in every muscle, in the breadth of those shoulders, in the stoutness of those legs, shod in huge boots, in every calm, firm, deliberate gesture. These chief traits which constitute the power of Russia, simplicity and straightforwardness, are visible. But here, on every face, it seems to you that the danger, misery, and the sufferings of war have, in addition to these principal characteristics, left traces of consciousness of personal worth, emotion, and exalted thought. All at once, a frightful roar, which shakes not your organs of hearing alone, but your whole being, startles you so that you tremble all over. Then you hear the distant shriek of the shot as it pursues its course, and the dense smoke of the powder conceals from you the platform and the black figures of the sailors who are moving about upon it. You hear various remarks of the sailors in reference to this shot, and you see their animation, and an exhibition of a feeling which you had not expected to behold, perhaps, a feeling of malice, of revenge against the enemy, which lies hidden in the soul of each man. It struck the embrasure itself. It seems to have killed 2 men. See, they've carried them off, you hear in joyful exclamation. And now they are angry. They'll fire at us directly, says someone. And in fact, shortly after you see a flash in front and smoke, the sentry, who is standing on the breastwork, shouts, "Canon!" And then the ball shrieks past you, strikes the earth, and scatters a shower of dirt and stones about it. This ball enrages the commander of the battery. He orders a second and a third gun to be loaded. The enemy also begins to reply to us, and you experience a sensation of interest. You hear and see interesting things. Again the sentry shouts, "Canon!" and you hear the same report and blow, the same shower, or he shouts, "Mortar!" and you hear the monotonous, even rather pleasant whistle of the bomb, with which it is difficult to connect the thought of horror. You hear this whistle approaching you and increasing in swiftness. Then you see the black sphere, the impact on the ground, the resounding explosion of the bomb which can be felt. With the whistle and shriek, splinters fly again, stones whiz through the air, and mud showers over you. At these sounds you experience a strange feeling of enjoyment and, at the same time, of terror. At the moment when you know that the projectile is flying towards you, it will infallibly occur to you that this shot will kill you. But the feeling of self-love upholds you, and no one perceives the knife which is cutting your heart. But when the shot has flown past without touching you, you grow animated, and a certain cheerful, inexpressibly pleasant feeling overpowers you, but only for a moment, so that you discover a peculiar sort of charm in danger. In this game of life and death, you want cannonballs or bombs to strike nearer to you. But again, the sentry has shouted in his loud, thick voice, "Mortar!" Again, there is a shriek, and a bomb bursts, but with this noise comes the groan of a man. You approach the wounded man at the same moment with the bearers. He has a strange, inhuman aspect, covered as he is with blood and mud. A part of the sailor's breast has been torn away. During the first moments, there is visible on his mud-stained face only fear and a certain simulated, premature expression of suffering, peculiar to men in that condition. But, at the same time, as the stretcher is brought to him and he is laid upon it on his sound side, you observe that this expression is replaced by an expression of a sort of exaltation and lofty, inexpressible thought. His eyes shine more brilliantly, his teeth are clenched, his head is held higher with difficulty, and, as they lift him up, he stops the bearers and says to his comrades with difficulty and in a trembling voice, "Farewell, brothers." He tries to say something more, and it is plain that he wants to say something touching, but he repeats once more, "Farewell, brothers." At that moment, one of his fellow sailors steps up to him, puts the cap on the head, which the wounded man holds towards him, and waving his hand indifferently, returns calmly to his gun. That's the way with 7 or 8 men every day, says the naval officer to you, in reply to the expression of horror which has appeared upon your countenance, as he yawns and rolls a cigarette of yellow paper. Thus you have seen the defenders of Sevastopol on the very scene of the defense, and you go back paying no attention, for some reason or other, to the cannonballs and bullets, which continue to shriek the whole way until you reach the ruined theatre. You proceed with composure and with your soul in a state of exaltation. The principal and cheering conviction which you have brought away is the conviction of the impossibility of the Russian people wavering anywhere whatever. And this impossibility you have discerned not in the multitude of traverses, breastworks, artfully interlaced trenches, mines, and ordnance, piled one upon the other, of which you have comprehended nothing, but you have discerned it in the eyes, the speech, the manners, in what is called the spirit of the defenders of Sevastopol. What they are doing, they do so simply, with so little effort and exertion, that you are convinced that they can do 100 times more, that they can do anything. You understand that the feeling which makes them work is not a feeling of pettiness, ambition, forgetfulness, which you have yourself experienced, but a different sentiment, one more powerful, and one which has made of them men who live with their ordinary composure under the fire of cannon amid hundreds of chances of death, instead of the one to which all men are subject who live under these conditions amid incessant labor, poverty, and dirt. Men will not accept these frightful conditions for the sake of a cross or a title, nor because of threats. There must be another lofty incentive as a cause, and this cause is the feeling which rarely appears, of which a Russian is ashamed, that which lies at the bottom of each man's soul, love for his country. Only now have the tales of the early days of the Siege of Sevastopol, when there were no fortifications there, no army, no physical possibility of holding it, and when at the same time there was not the slightest doubt that it would not surrender to the enemy, of the days when that hero worthy of ancient Greece, Kornilov, said as he reviewed the army, "We will die, children, but we will not surrender Sevastopol." And our Russians, who are not fitted to be phrase-makers, replied, "We will die! Hurrah!" Only now have tales of that time ceased to be for you the most beautiful historical legends, and have become real facts and worthy of belief. You comprehend clearly, you figure to yourself, those men whom you have just seen as the very heroes of those grievous times, who have not fallen, but have been raised by the Spirit, and have joyfully prepared for death, not for the sake of the city, but of the country. This Epios of Sevastopol, whose hero was the Russian people, will leave mighty traces in Russia for a long time to come. Night is already falling. The sun has emerged from the grey clouds, which cover the sky just before its setting, and has suddenly illuminated with a crimson glow the purple vapours, the greenish sea covered with ships and boats rocking on the regular swell, and the white buildings of the city, and the people who are moving through its streets. Sounds of some old waltz played by the regimental band on the boulevard, and the sounds of firing from the bastions which echo them strangely are borne across the water.